Tara Arneson,
Present.
Kevin Campbell,
Here.
Heather Chadwick,
Here.
Allison Conant,
She's not here tonight.
Stephen Diglio,
At the same time.
Edie Graining,
She's not here.
James Granzow,
Also not here.
Susan Lillick,
Here.
Sandra Limoges,
Here.
Kyle Magida,
Here.
Ethan Mara,
Here.
Stuart Morisot,
Here.
Katie Nelson,
Here.
and Lisa Pollock.
Here.
Thank you. Student Rep Eli Wimet.
Here.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Pat. I know we have a few community members here this evening. So for community comments, we limit each person to 5 minutes. We request that participants clearly state their name, place of residence, topic of comment. The school board will take no action on items raised during the community comment, and dialogue exchanges will be for clarification only. So unless immediate attention is required, action by the school board will occur at a subsequent meeting. Augustine? I heard that maybe you wanted to talk about something with us this evening. Just because we all have kids that go to school with you. Yeah.
No, I didn't have anything scheduled.
Okay.
For just community members.
Wonderful. Welcome. And I'm sorry my back is to you.
That's okay.
Okay, having none this evening, we're going to move into the DQS or District Quality Standards, which took effect July 1. You going to dive in, John?
Yes. And I have just a few slides that we'll put up for everyone. So the new DQS are in effect right now, but none of the rubrics have been published yet by the Agency of Education, which complicates the process of having them in effect. So these are all a derivative of the Series 100 rules. And so the purpose of these rules was to bring about greater alignment between Vermont schools and to ensure what they call substantial equity and quality across the state. These rules came into effect or were written in their first form and published 2.5 years ago. And they were the outcome of an act by the legislature to require this. And despite the fact that we don't have the rubrics yet, there is some good kind of overview for us to go through, but then I can also talk a little bit about the process that the agency has outlined for us, because the arrival of beta rubrics is imminent. And so it's important for us to be well-grounded in this work, because when the rubrics do come out, and Andrew and I were talking about this before the meeting started, depending on the actual published date, we'll have somewhere between 1 to 3 weeks to turn around the rubric for the agency, which means we'll need to have some considerable flexibility at central office, but also as a board with our agendas, just given the need for some of that work to happen here in board meetings. The first standard is actually around leadership, and this is going to connect really strongly with a later agenda item, that continuous improvement plan that we have for board approval, I think is our second to last item. And the other big piece here is it requires school and district leaders to evaluate the data we have with an eye towards equity and potential equity issues across the school district and across schools. A great many of these standards actually are not about student learning, they're about school and district operations. And so you will see over and over again the requirement for certain planning documents, 1, 3, and 5 year increments. Things like a capital improvement plan for each facility that gets updated annually. There's a new requirement for audits, which has in all of these, many of these have either been this exact practice for this district, or we've been very close to this practice. So there's not a lot of work to come into compliance with these for us, thankfully. But going through that assurance process will be, there are quite a few rules around human resources, and one of them that is really interesting is some specific requirements for succession planning, which we already have actually as a requirement in the district. And then also some specific requirements around the evaluation of leadership in the district, especially principals. With facilities, we talked about those 5-year plans. In those plans, there are requirements about specific pieces of safety above and beyond the physical plan. There's pieces about air quality in particular, and then also about our technology infrastructure. And then our emergency planning is also covered under the facilities umbrella. The 5th standard is about governance, and this is the one that the board will have to do some work in either October or November. There are several beta rubrics that are going to be coming this year for the board to use to evaluate our functioning in this area and inform our desired improvements. And this is actually a great way to segue into this, talking about the rubrics themselves. So this year, everything about the process is designed to be a test. So the agency is going to publish some of the rubrics, not all of the required rubrics. There will be somewhere between 5 and 12 that end up being published this year. And we'll have to go through the self-evaluation process for that. The agency may or may not select us for verification of that process. So we'll submit everything to them, but they might actually come and do some site visits with some school districts to review that process and talk to the people who participated in it. And then the agency is not going to be publishing specific school or district results from this year, but they will in subsequent years. So this is really a dry run for everyone. What they're doing for this first year is they'll take all of the results and aggregate them and report out on a statewide basis. The other official use for the data they collect this year will be to begin to inform their process for identifying schools and school districts for what they call technical assistance. That is a broad term that they use when they decide that schools or school districts need assistance in any number of areas, and the agency then provides their expertise to help school districts address those identified elements. Sorry, I kind of blended the process for accountability with actually the interventions for noncompliance. So I didn't miss anything there. So the list of actions the agency could take are expansive when you read this document, and include a lot of powers that other states have long used in the name of school improvement, but Vermont has not, and that goes all the way up to school closure or forcing the school districts or school unions to dismantle it, or direct takeover by the agency itself. So for us though, we are in really great shape with all of these, especially the areas that are highlighted for these potential beta rubrics. So for us, really the call is to be able to be nimble and respond to these rubrics when they're published, because we will have a short window of time to do the work that we need to do and obtain any assistance we need from the agency and turning it around. So happy to pause there and see if we have any questions about district quality standards.
Just reading through these, they seem to map fairly closely to a lot of policies we have. Do we have that actual tentative mapping of this policy? This policy applies to this section, pending rubrics and all that.
So Andrew's actually done a nice job, and you'll see this later about mapping some of our priority work back to the quality standards. We have not done that work yet for the district quality standards because there's been so much information that has been yet to be released. But we are, once it is released, I think in very good shape, because what you pointed out is true. We have these standards are based off best practice for school districts, and we're fortunate that this district has been utilizing a lot of different best practices for many years.
The VSBA had a lot of input around the DQS and then the rubrics that are forthcoming. So it's, it's going to be on a scale, and I want to say it's not going to be as easy as like meets expectations, exceeds expectations, or like does not meet. When I saw them, and this was in summer of 2024 when the AOE came to the VSBA to talk about it, my term would be they look wonky. Like, how do we fit into that? In the VSBA, we were able to give them a fair amount of feedback as to like what makes sense as board members and how we interpret things as board members. Whether or not that feedback was taken into consideration when they actually built the rubrics, I don't know, because we haven't seen the rubrics yet. But like when I go through our own, right, so John talks about what we'll have to do for the district, but as a board, we are going to have to go through, 113? Yeah, section 113 on our own. And right, like from where I sit, I think we're okay, but there are spaces where like we don't conduct monitoring reports on ourselves in our policy governance processes. So I think it's something where we will have to make improvements. But I think overall, like our goals as a board are the ends goals, the ends, right? Like everything is working.
Yeah, I agree, Tara. I think that school districts and boards that have a practice of following the guidance from the VSBA, especially when it comes to model policies, will find this work easier than school districts that have placed their own guidance.
Yeah, and I also can't remember if it's going to be a different rubric for SUs and a separate rubric for SDs, or it's just going to be all worked into one. And having not seen it in over a year, I don't remember.
Is there a sense of when the rubrics will be available? I mean, so the turnaround time is quick to do the self-evaluation.
So I can share the guidance that we were given from the agency is that they'd be released before the 1st of September. And they're not out yet. That said, they do have training sessions scheduled within 3 weeks of the due dates for all the rubrics, and those kick off in the middle of October. So I would say, I would knock on wood, I would hope by the middle of October we would have the list of rubrics. For the actual rubrics.
Actually, somewhere between that.
You mentioned training sessions. Are those for the district, or do you think will be expected to attend them? Are they on the regular VSBA training?
The VSBA did or has one scheduled.
Okay,
Already.
so we should take a look at that.
Yeah.
And the agency ones, or past practice holds, what they'll do is they'll publish their own trainings and they'll be recorded and available on the website for people to watch anytime. All right. You want me to keep going with behavior threat
I do.
assessments?
Keep introducing you.
So last meeting, we reviewed the behavior threat assessment policy. We had some good conversation about what procedures could look like for that and what the state was looking to achieve. And so I linked in some more documents from the state. So this is an interesting thing. Some school districts have chosen to make their procedures related to this available upon request and not publish them on the website because they do deal with very specific safety protocols. And in a situation where we would be following a very specific safety protocol, the advice from law enforcement is to not have that be a public protocol. That is actually with our attorneys for review right now. I want to make sure that we're not running afoul of the state's rules on policy and procedure publishing. But assuming that we get the same leeway that, or the same advice other districts have gotten, that's the approach that we'll take as a district. But I think the state documents that I submitted the link for are super useful for us because our policies and procedures are modeled off of the state and the VSBA language.
Does that require the legal review, does that postpone voting on this, or are we approving this as it is, and then we'll handle the protocol for publishing?
Yeah, so we will publish the policy, which is what you have before you for a vote today. The procedures then will be what we develop for implementation for that. And those will be available on request for any community member. We can't make them unavailable, but we don't have to, my understanding is that we don't have to publish them freely because they're related to student safety.
Are our current procedures published?
Yes.
Can I make a motion to approve the behavior threat teams policy?
Yes, you can. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Andrew, are you going to take us into district priorities
I
or?
think John's going to start us off and kick it back to me.
Yes.
Perfect.
Ooh, yeah, that's a fancy way to say it.
I'm learning about MMU music, so.
So the first thing to know is that we have a standing set of multi-year priorities as a district. That last year the decision was made to add an additional year on through the superintendent transition, which I certainly appreciate. And there's been some real tremendous work in these areas. These policies came out of the combination of local needs assessment and a desire to be in compliance with what the state was asking us to do as a district. And so I will put the list up there and turn it over to Andrew.
Yeah, so that should look pretty familiar to folks. I've seen that, I don't know how many times at this juncture. But, you know, when I came on board in 2021, that was when John started kind of putting these together using the resources that John just indicated. And these have really been incredibly helpful at all levels for the last several years to really keep us focused on kind of the core work. These kind of main priorities, as you know, encompass a lot of work. And they're things that we would probably need to do even if they weren't necessarily listed up here, such as, you know, professional learning communities and multi-tiered systems of support. They're just kind of part of good practice from the school. But that being said, this has really helped to keep us focused on what we feel are like the highest leverage, you know, kind of pieces of the system. Because as you know, even just in the last couple of years, there's a lot of things that are coming towards schools, and this helps us kind of stay focused on what we feel are the most important pieces. Go to the next slide. I've shown this before too, but I think something that's important for this group and really everyone to understand is that those different priorities are not kind of operating by themselves, that these are all complementary to one another and are interconnected in various ways. So when we're working on, say social emotional learning, well, that's really critical to early grades literacy and equity and inclusion as well. If we're not kind of focusing on, students' social emotional learning needs, they're likely going to struggle academically. So just important to know that these things are all interconnected. Oh no. That's an important slide too. There it is.
So I love this slide. After I saw Andrew share this last spring with the district, I actually took it and made a copy from my previous district and made it work for us. Because there's a lot of anxiety on the teacher side of things around the new education quality standards and the work that's going to be required for that. But the reality is these priorities are very well aligned with that work and the moves that teachers need to make. And so this is a great grid of kind of aligning these longstanding priorities we have as a district to those parts of the education quality standards, and then further pulling out specific pieces of work that are happening in the district right now. And so I think it's a great document for us to refer back to. The links are super helpful where there are links. And I just want to thank Andrew and his team for the work they did to put this together. It's helped teachers navigate this. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else about it, Andrew.
No, just that the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years positions us really well to implement various elements of the education quality standards.
And I would say too, there is this cross-cutting focus or core focus for us, and that is really the use of data across the district in all of these priority areas for us. There's been a huge increase in the requirement for both the collection and review of data by the agency of education, but also a desire to do that in our buildings with teachers and teacher teams, principals, and across the district. So Andrew and Jen Cote and other members of the team have been working really hard about how to do that in a way that's aligned across the district so that teachers can support each other and not duplicate each other's.
So,
Andrew.
yeah, what I'm going to do next is kind of run through each of these different priorities. I'm not going to talk about every single point, but really focus on a few different things and just really provide you all with an understanding of not only what are we working on now, but what are the areas that we've made some significant progress over the last couple of years.
So, Andrew, just a point of clarity, each of these slides is one of the priorities.
That's
right?
correct. Yep. So the first one is social emotional learning and well-being. One thing to mention is we will continue with our belonging survey. It will no longer be through Panorama, it will be through PowerSchool, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But we're going to have the same set of questions so that they can be compared to years past. And right now we're working with our coach and principal team to expand that survey out from just the focus on belonging, but to incorporate other elements of social emotional learning as well. So we can have a little more expansive data set to work with. I would say the two big things that we continue to work on and improve on are using what are called responsive classroom strategies at the K-4 level. These are things like morning meeting, and making sure that we're focusing on the first 6 weeks of school. That's an important time, particularly at the elementary level, that we build those classroom routines and that classroom culture to ensure that students feel that they're part of the classroom community so that they can be available to learn academically. And then at the middle school, but really at all levels, also using what are called restorative practices. Both Browns River and Camel's Hump have been doing some training with Starling Collaborative, which is a regional education consulting company, to support their staff with building their repertoire of restorative practice skills. And then I guess the other thing I'd draw your attention to is just trying to incorporate social emotional learning, skill building, not just in an isolated fashion from guidance counselors who have historically kind of led the charge with providing that sort of instruction and support, but also supporting classroom teachers to pull more of that into their classroom so that we can kind of de-silo that work and share the responsibility of providing those supports.
Why the shift from Panorama to PowerSchool? Because I feel like we've
That's a big one.
lot about Panorama.
I will talk about that one in a couple of slides.
Okay.
Yes. Great question. It's a good question. I will get there for sure. Our A-bar and equity work, Kat Yoon continues to focus on K-8, and Steph Sleeper is working at the high school, really providing ongoing support and guidance in a lot of different ways. Kat really is our core lead and facilitator for the A-bar council meetings, which we will have, I think there's 5 of those this year. We continue to use a train the trainer model where we provide a training kind of overview during the council meeting. Those council members who are also part of their school-based committees then bring that training back, provide that training to those committees, and then they provide that to all staff. So we can ensure a consistent and coherent approach to this work. Something that's really exciting that we're going to be working on this year is Kat worked with a subgroup of individuals from the council to develop what they've called a social justice embedded curriculum that ties together the curriculum that we're already doing. It also connects with the Vermont IRIS standards. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those or not, but those are some standards that were crafted out of the Act 1 working group from 2019 that really aim to create, standards and outcomes and things like that related to this work. And so this is not started yet. It's just something we've only just developed the standards and kind of the crosswalks. And so that's going to be the focus of the ABAR Council this year, is to really help support teachers with incorporating these pieces into their classrooms using units and curriculum that they've already been using, so that we're not trying to just put something new in there, but really embedding it into everything that we're already doing. So this is, again, it's broad work. It's daunting work. There's a lot to this. And part of what's really helped, I think, make this work successful the last few years is to really focusing our attention, because it is so broad. It sometimes allows us to go off in a lot of different directions. But by winnowing down and focusing on, last year was the educational quality standards and getting kind of a broad understanding of those throughout everyone in the district. And now to focus in on these embedded social justice curriculum pieces.
Andrew, I just want to add 2 quick things here. So one is, work like this brings about lots of questions in lots of communities across the state right now, because a lot of the terms like equity and anti-bias and anti-racism have become very politically charged in our society. Regardless of the terms at the top of the slide, the work that has been happening here in the district is really based, or not really, is based off those state standards, those Vermont IRIS standards, which are required for all schools to implement. And if people have questions about what does this look like in school, or what kind of shifts are we actually talking about, I encourage you to actually read those standards. It's an easy read. And I think if anybody has anxiety about what this looks like in schools, it's a very anxiety-reducing exercise. That said, Susanna's last name I always forget. Davis, yes. So Susanna Davis is the equity director for the state, who's been a real champion for work like this and helpful to schools as they navigate it. She makes a great point very consistently that when we look at equity across schools, we often get caught in an image of what that looks like. And for us as a state, and certainly for us as a district, our 2 biggest populations where we see the biggest equity gaps are our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and our students who are eligible for an individual education plan, so our students with disabilities. So for us as a district, equity takes lots of different forms, but if we look at the area where we have critical masses of students, it might not be the one that comes to mind first when we read some of the terms on the slide. So I just always like to point that out for us this group.
One logistical, not just are the equity inclusion coaches, are they working exclusively with staff members, and how much of this then trickles down to the students?
That's a good question. Thank you. Right now, they're really focused on partnering with principals and working with staff. Something that they've talked about is, working with students. I think Kat may have done maybe 1 or 2 presentations in some classrooms. I'm not sure, but really it's been focused on staff. I think what we're focused on right now is how do we support and empower staff to do this work in their classrooms, not that Kat or staff don't want to do this work in the classrooms, but really we need to focus on the staff first. So I think in the future that could be something, but right now it's really been more during staff meetings or other times for training, or just individually, staff member might reach out to Kat and be like, hey, could you help me with whatever, and then she'll come and support them. So right now it's really more similar to our instructional coaches. Our instructional coaches, are in the classroom a lot with students, but they're generally focused on supporting the teacher. But it's a great question, thank you. All right, another big one, early grades literacy. First, we've been following Act 139 that came out in 2024. There's various kind of requirements on that, such as sending out letters when students when students meet a 30% threshold on our universal screeners, which are the STAR screeners. So we've been following those pieces, and a lot of that was really already in place, so it's not a big lift for us. We've been working intently to really make sure that social studies and science don't fall through the cracks, and that we keep that, particularly in the K-4 classroom, where there's never enough time. And oftentimes literacy, does take a fair chunk of the time during the day. And our coaches and educators have worked really closely with our literacy coaches and educators to really keep that in the forefront of our mind, particularly as we work to implement ARC, which is American Reading Company. And there's a lot I could say about this. I don't think I ever had a chance back in the spring to provide many updates on this, because we were probably really in the throes of figuring all this out. But as you likely know, we've had a few years where we've really been kind of creating, I don't want to say creating our own thing, but we didn't have a formalized curriculum to operate from. We had our learning targets and our benchmark understandings and quite a few curricular resources, but not a formalized curriculum. We had been using Lucy Calkins, which I don't think I need to talk too much about. I think you're all pretty familiar with that and the issues that came along with that. A lot of work was done really from January to April of last year to work with our ELA curriculum committee, which is composed of principals, coaches, classroom educators, special educators, interventionists, to identify a replacement, because it was just deemed that what we were doing wasn't crafting enough kind of coherence and consistency, and kind of, if we want to ensure equity across our schools, it's really important to have a formal curriculum. And what we ended up focusing on was ARC, and this is our first year implementing that. A lot of work has gone in to the last, really since probably May, to prepare for the rollout of this. Our instructional coaches and principals have done a ton of work to make sure that this rollout is as smooth as possible. I'm sure there will be speed bumps along the way, but so far it's gone pretty well, and teachers have generally been pretty supportive of this. This is going to be a multi-year effort. Implementing a new curriculum is never easy, but the hope is that by having this formalized curriculum and with all the resources that go along with it, that we can really continue to improve in really K-4 literacy, which will then set a solid foundation for everything after that. So there's a lot to talk about with ARC, but that really, in this kind of area of early grades literacy, that is the focus. Most of our early release and in-service days for the K-4 level are focused on supporting teachers with implementation, and without our instructional coaches, we could not do this. So they're a critical part of this entire process.
I have a question, Andrew.
Absolutely.
So, not just the Lucy Calkins program, but does that mean that the other programs that we adopted in between are sort of not like the Florida?
UFly.
Yeah.
No. So those are complementary, and we can still use those in a variety of ways. So for instance, with UFly, that can be used as what's called a tier 2 resource. So something that teachers can use after they've already tried the ARC materials. Integrity is another one that worked really well, and so that can be included with this.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that was a major kind of consideration for the various programs that are out there, is we didn't want to ditch things that we'd invested funds in. So we purchased a lot of books for classrooms. All of those are still usable and can be used with ARC. UFly may not be used exactly the same way as it was before, but we can still leverage those resources that we had purchased already.
And then I know one question that we get a lot in this conversation is also, like, are the level readers sort of still kicking around, or is that?
So that's another great question.
There's the, throwing the baby out with the bathwater
We've worked, I would say, back when the whole Lucy Calkins thing blew up, you could have easily went and bought a new program and did what a lot of schools did. If you listen to the podcast, Sold a Story, is go around with a truck, get all the books, and then throw it to the trash heap.
Right.
We didn't do that. We really have taken a more moderate kind of incremental approach to this, so that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that we're getting rid of, certain practices and certain resources that we know we shouldn't be using anymore. But at the same time, not just, taking everything and just starting anew, that we're really building off of what we've been doing before. And I'd say the last couple of years, the main focus that we've been supporting teachers with are what's called the science of reading practices, and really focusing on the instructional practices and the curriculum with ARC will really bolster what they've been learning the last couple of years. So I think we've done, honestly, a good job. I'm actually most glad that we didn't, immediately go and buy another curriculum, because this has been done so carefully and thoughtfully.
I'm just concerned the kiddos that have been learning like to read with the other system, is this vastly different, or are they gonna not see a huge difference where we're not gonna be setting them back or creating a lag?
Are you saying concerns about the students who went through the old system?
Yeah, who are
Yeah.
still in the throes of learning to read, but for changing.
Yeah, no, the last couple of years it's been very incremental, and I would say that, though we were using Lucy Calkins materials for a while, I think a lot of our teachers who, as I think you already know, are some of the best in the entire state, we're already getting rid of some of those practices that they knew through their own professional learning we weren't supposed to do. Same thing with our instructional coaches. I've been here since 2021, and the moment we started getting kind of those whiffs of Lucy Calkins being a little iffy, we started kind of rethinking how we approach this work. So, with having kind of a K-12 view of this, I think, and just looking at data, we'll be able to kind of identify if there are pockets of students that are struggling and provide necessary remediation. So we'll be on the lookout for that, but I don't think it's going to be such a jolt that it's going to be vastly different than what we've been doing kind of the last couple of years. Really, it's going to be the specific materials that students are using from the curriculum. Those would be different.
Sorry. Any other questions? Go ahead. I've already.
I was yawning.
Oh.
So excited.
And then just following on that, I know we're talking about early literacy, and I think Heather was maybe talking about, that we fly and Haggerty group and see how that is working. But I can never let this conversation go by without also advocating for the kids who did go through Lucy Calkins practices and are still in our district and may also be struggling to read, but in ways that aren't as easily identified as what we may be looking for. And I just always hope that that is heard and that those supports are happening for those kids who are now in high school.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at all levels of our education system, we have different kind of tools in play to really, make sure students aren't falling through the cracks. It looks different at different levels. At the up to the 8th grade level, we do use the STAR screeners. So that's a tool that we have to just kind of get a snapshot to be like, oh, this student here is kind of lagging in this skill, so that we can get to it before it becomes a problem. So the hope would be that, through those tools, using our interventionists and classroom educators, that we're trying to kind of cut that off in the past, so that they're not kind of continuing through their educational career with either using outdated skills or otherwise struggling. Which actually, I think that might connect really well with the next piece. Oh yeah, it does perfectly. Multi-tiered systems of support. That's a critical part to that, both in reading, but really all content areas. This goes to your power school question.
One last.
What's that?
One last on ARC if
Okay.
we're moving ahead on that.
Sure.
Are there good research studies or things we could look at on ARC? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I could probably pull some things together for you. It is one of the most highly rated, which is why we went with it. Many school districts in the state are using it. That was one of our. I could talk a lot around how we got to the decision on this. It was in depth. A lot of school visits, a lot of review of materials, a lot of kind of things that we want to make sure that it incorporated in there. And so I could certainly find some things that you could use, but I can tell you with a high degree of certainty that it's probably the best, if not one of the best we could probably buy.
Andrew, can I just make a comment? I am so excited as to where we're at right now, because it's certainly, instruction and instructional practices evolve over time. And, the fact that we've got the science of reading in place, and there's been a lot of training, and then this new curriculum, I think that's fantastic. So.
Yeah, me too. I mean, this is my 5th year in the district, and so I've seen a lot over these, 4 years. And I think, given what I've seen, we've come a long ways, and I agree that I think we're in a really good spot for sure, and it's just going to get better.
Yeah, thank you.
MTSS. So a quick little story. VCAT. I don't know who's familiar with VCAT, but VCAT, VCAT. It was developed by this person, Steve Peary, who has connections all over the place. But basically, he created this kind of homegrown system, a grade book, that many school districts use for quite some time. I don't know how long he was around, 15 years, something like that. He'd been hinting the last couple of years that he wanted to retire. And so we started looking into alternatives to VCAT. I put together, we call it the Power School Committee or something like that back in, I want to say 23, because that's when we first started hearing about it. I'm really glad we did. Because in April of this year, he told us that he's shutting down in August of 2025. So we knew it was coming. Thank goodness we had done a lot of kind of research prior. And that committee, which is still in operation, we've used for a wide variety of other things. Now our Technology Implementation Committee. So it connects with all things technology. That's where Panorama came about. And so we started investigating different options. And without boring you with the entire story, we landed on Power School. And this was done collaboratively. It wasn't something that I thought up in a back room somewhere, but really went with Power School because it provided all the tools that we needed to replace VCAT. And we were already kind of well placed to adopt it since we were using some what you can call modules of Power School at the K-8 level and very much at the 9-12 level. So Power School is kind of like the overarching piece. Now, we also had Panorama. Panorama is where we stored all of our data and allowed us to analyze things like star data, behavior data, things like that. It's also the tool we use to both create and distribute the belonging surveys. That was probably the hardest part of the decision. Is we never want to kind of move away from something that people have become familiar with and is only year 2. That being said, Power School could do all the things that Panorama could do. So even though we didn't want to do that, it just made sense to do that. Some of the key modules that we're using are Performance Matters. Performance Matters is kind of the direct replacement for VCAT. This is where teachers will directly input assessment data for the various assessments that they do in their classrooms that are common across classrooms. We also have what's called Analytics and Insights. This will also replace another component of Panorama where we were putting in all of our Tier 3 intervention plans for students who were working with interventionists. And then we also have this is a missing piece, is the Power Teacher Pro. That's the gradebook. And that was really kind of a big missing piece, particularly at the middle school, where folks were just kind of using their own spreadsheets and other things. And so now all these tools talk to one another, feed information to one another. And I think the most exciting part, and it's related to the slide, is the analytics and insights. And this allows us, when I say us, I mean administrators, coaches, but most importantly, classroom teachers, to really dig into the data so they can start to analyze it. And that connects back to our core focus for this year, is really making sure that we're making decisions based on data. That was one of the biggest issues with VCAT, was it was very difficult, if not impossible, to go in there and manipulate the data. You really had to export it and bring it into different tools. And so it was kind of clunky. Not that Power School is perfect by all means, it's not. And it's what we went with, and I'm feeling really good about it. We've already kind of shared some of these pieces back in the spring. On Wednesday, so this Wednesday is kind of our first official training. So Jeff Wallace, our director of technology, Sean and Mike, our digital learning leaders, and others have been working, I'll say, tirelessly over the entire summer. I probably went to 30 PowerSchool related meetings from July to the end of August. Jeff probably went to even more, because I'll tell you right now, there is a crazy amount of background stuff that has to go in to making these tools work for us and to transfer in all that stuff. So we're in a really good spot. I feel really confident our ability to implement these. They're pretty user friendly, and this is going to be a first year. So again, similar to ARC, there might be little bumps here or there, but I think for most folks, it will just be an improvement on VCAT. That was one of the most clear things that I heard when I came on board here in 2021, is when I'd asked around, what are some things you want to change, or what do you not like? VCAT was always the thing that came up, because it just was kind of clunky and people weren't super stoked on it. So people, I think, will be happy with the shift to PowerSchool. That connects with MTSS because it goes to all the data stuff. So it really helps with both our data management and, importantly, data analysis.
I was gonna say, do you have any early feedback from any of the teachers that are switching over to using this now, or?
Well, no, because we haven't even, really Wednesday is going to be the first real dabble day. I mean, most of these things, teachers don't really even need for a couple weeks out.
Yeah.
And we really haven't even been able to get them built until probably the last week or two, because of, trying to pull things out of VCAT, and again, just the magnitude of the kind of behind the scenes building. So I will certainly provide updates to the board, but from the folks that we've worked with, interventionists, coaches, and some teachers, just to get them in there playing around. I was in a meeting with some interventionists, and they're like, yep, this looks good. I spoke with an interventionist at RES the other day when I was heading out, and they were really excited about this, pretty easy to use. So we'll see how it goes. We adopted PowerSchool when I was a teacher at Mount Abe. Granted, that was a while ago. But if anything, it's gotten better and easier to use.
I'll just re-emphasize or thank Andrew and Jeff and the teams that have been working on this, because the amount of work actually to make this easy for teachers to start doing come Wednesday is, like you were saying, I think you actually downplayed it, if anything. It was an incredible amount of work and coordination among a lot of different people. So I know Jeff's on the call too. Thank you both.
Yeah, we're doing great work. PLCs, we've been talking about this for a while. Again, the focus here is really just improvement. At the admin retreat, I did an activity with the principals to kind of get some perception and progress understanding related to both MTSS and PLCs. And I want to say it was Derek, principal of Smiley, who was like, we shouldn't say we're implementing this anymore. We should say we're refining it. And I was like, that's fantastic. And that was really kind of the vibe from a lot of principals, is that, particularly as it pertains to this, is there work to do? Sure. But really, we're in a tweaking, refining stage with the core focus of really just centering that data use and having that be the core work of these groups. But these groups have been working for a while, for several years. It's routinized. It's part of just kind of daily operations for teachers. And so we're just kind of, continuing to make improvements as we go along. But really, this has kind of become kind of part of what we do in our schools. And then alignment of curriculum. I'd say the big one here is our continued work between particularly 8th grade and 9th grade, but really middle school and high school, to create those alignments, certainly in the core content areas, which has been our focus for last year, actually the last 2 years, but to start building that out to others. This connects with really back to COVID, where we had a lot of structures, routines, and processes in place that when COVID came along, it just kind of made them disappear. And now we have to build them back. And that's part of this work, is rebuilding those collaborative groups, finding the time to do this work, which has also been one of the challenges. Prior to COVID, it was quite a bit easier to pull a group of teachers for a half a day or a full day, get some subs in there and they can come, work somewhere and get some work done, that's pretty tricky to do. So we can't really, it's difficult for us to pull, large teams because being able to find those subs is not as easy as it once was. And that's kind of the crux of the work, is finding the time. And this often happens over the summertime where our coaches work with teams of teachers to rebuild units, to develop new units, and otherwise craft kind of coherence and alignment with the curriculum. This work is always ongoing. It's never done. And one of the other kind of big things to point out is, since I've been here, we've had what are called the curriculum committees for the 4 content areas. We have been working with principals to kind of start fresh. So we've had the same groups of teachers for probably over 5 years now. And so we're restarting over. We're kind of doing a rebrand, if you will. And that's going to be the work that we do over the next couple of weeks. I'm meeting with our instructional coaches tomorrow morning here at Camel's Hump, actually. And this is going to be the core work, is kind of looking at the teachers who have reapplied to be part of these curriculum committees. And then we'll be working with the principals next week to kind of redevelop them and then get those different pieces in play. I would say that our curriculum committees, or curriculum councils as they'll be called moving forward, have been one of the most important structures that we have in this district, because it really puts the classroom teachers, special educators, interventionists, the folks who are working with students, in the driver's seat to really make decisions around topics of curriculum. For instance, ARC was decided by consensus by the K4 ELA group. I was in the room. I didn't vote on it at all. They voted on it. They voted on how they wanted to move forward with implementing it as well, some of the more nuanced elements. So teachers really have a pretty big role in the curriculum, at least as far as it pertains to these core areas, certainly in other areas too, but it's something that I partner with folks, but a lot of decisions are not made by myself. They're made by teams of teachers.
Andrew, quick question. What's the size of the curriculum committees?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we're revamping. So they were getting pretty big, like 20 per group, which if you've ever tried to make a decision in a group of 20, it's very difficult to do. You want to have a broader array of insights, and so we are trying to winnow it down a little bit so we can still have broad representation from the different schools and the different grade levels, but just a little smaller. And then underneath those councils, then we'll have what we're going to call working groups, and that's where the councils will be more like kind of visionary. And then the working groups are where more of that work will happen. So the hope is that it can just make these groups just a little more efficient and bring some new life into the groups as well. Just get some new folks in there who maybe haven't had a chance to be part of these groups.
Sounds good.
All right, John, can we move on to the last one? That's all you.
Yeah, so this is, I promised that things were pretty closely related tonight, and this is one of the ways that that's true. So the next agenda item, just to preview that, is actually looking at and approving the continuous improvement plans that each of the schools has developed. And you'll see, as you look through those, that actually there's quite a few mechanisms and schedules for monitoring our progress across schools. We are data rich and information poor sometimes. So focusing on data that really informs our work related to these priorities is important. And principals and teams like these curriculum councils have done an incredible job of doing that work. But I think we also, we have really great tools now, like Andrew was talking about with Power School, these new Power School products that pull everything together in one place. And so teachers and interventionists and leaders don't have to go between 3 to 5 systems to get the data that they want. It's all in one place, and it actually makes creating groups and monitoring progress over time much easier for us. So super hopeful about all of that. And Andrew and I are actually really looking forward. We've already started collaborating on some of the monitoring reports related to these to the board. I think that we'll have some great things to celebrate and some really good insights into the work they have for us. Any questions on anything from the priorities presentation or anything we might want to go back to see?
Yeah, so thanks for sharing. And so over the last 5 years, we've been focusing on these 6 priorities that haven't really, I don't think we've added or removed anything there. And I took for your presentation, I'd say like the professional learning is probably the most obvious, but the other ones, there was some as well where if you didn't have it as a priority, if we didn't have it as a priority, nothing would change. And I personally look at priorities as things that if we didn't have it as a priority, we wouldn't be making the progress that we need to. So there's maybe 3 of the 6 that are actual, like need to be priorities right now. If they fell off, maybe they wouldn't get the traction that they need.
Can I jump in real quick? I 100% agree with you. And I would just say, yes. Because we would, if you were to say like, we're taking certain things off, I'm still doing MTSS, we have to.
There's still a lot of things in the
But
district.
what I think the important thing I want to mention, and I'm sorry to interrupt, is that they've gotten to the point now where they can fall off, but I'd say when we had them initially, they did need to be priorities.
Yeah. Yes, and because we have a lot of things the district is working on that don't align to these priorities. But when we put them together, they were things that needed funding, needed resources, needed attention, needed to talk to the community, those types of things. So they came on here, but now they're, if we weren't talking about them in this meeting, they would still continue. The flywheel example where it's like, it's moving. We don't need to put additional attention onto it. So think about that when we're putting together priorities, maybe looking ahead. And which other priorities on this list do you feel still should be on that list?
I mean, these are all things that were just part of like the work that we do in schools. These came about, right when I came on board. So again, John was really kind of the catalyst for crafting these. Some connected with, some laws, for instance, MTSS connected back to Act 173 from 2018. Early grades literacy was on there. That was prior to Act 139, but certainly, important for that. I would say these are just kind of part of the work that we do now, and we're working to like curriculum alignment. Like I said, I think that's probably priority for, I would say, most school districts because they're constantly doing that stuff. So I think to your point is, could we look at kind of rethinking this? Yes.
And did that timetable come in 2026? So this goes from 22 to 26.
Mhm.
So then as we're formulating the priorities going forward from 26 to 30, then we can see where we got. And the hope would be that we have addressed most of the things on the list by that point.
Well, I think that's what was supposed to happen, and Andrew started the conversation with, we've added this year because of the transition with our superintendent. So I assume if John Alberghini were still with us, this could look different right now.
And we'd started, we had talked about that too. And to your point, yeah, there was a lot of, because we could go a lot of different directions, but I'd say the intention was to stick with it to minimize additional things during John's first year.
And I think too, there's also part of the conversation has to be there's some new requirements in just the last year itself around some of these that are huge lifts with very little time to implement. And so I know that was also part of that conversation around that kind of extension to get past the quote unquote finish line with some of that.
Yeah, that's why I think a couple of them maybe still need the attention because of those changes externally. Others I think continue. The other thing I noticed is you just have some of the words, the action words you use are continue with, right? And that's an indicator that it's just moving. So,
Right. That goes back to, my little vignette from the admin retreat that we've gotten to the point now where we've gotten past that initial implementation stage with some of these things. We're more in the refinement stage. So it's just becoming more institutionalized. Let's say like MTSS, there's some elements of that, particularly like tier 2 that we need to improve a little bit, but it's become, part of the work that we do, the conversations, the language we have, which is what we want.
Kevin, I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago when the district priorities were sort of like, they didn't exist, right? That was something that I think the board really asked for, and to also just be involved in the process of determining the priorities. And so, maybe just thinking about how this looks over the next year, how does the board stay involved in the conversation, be involved in the process to lend maybe insight or perspective, both from our own experiences, but from the community conversations that we have. But just to honor, I think, that piece, it wasn't just something that was dropped in. There was a lot of conversation happening leading up to that. That sort of connected.
It's just gonna stare at you a little longer.
I know. Piercing eyes.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we don't need priorities.
No, I know
I'm
that.
just saying that I think at the board and district level, these should be things that need our attention.
Mhm.
And I feel like many of these don't, because we've done the work
Past that.
to get these implemented, and it's now part of our system.
Mhm.
So, are there any of these that still need our help?
Are there new ones that we?
Are there new ones?
And likely with a major shift in the educational landscape, curriculum alignment might be a lot bigger.
And I think we have a good framework, and Tara and Edie and I have had discussions about the board agendas coming up. So we have the next board agenda is really about continuing the conversation from the leadership retreat around the ends and what those can look like in action and what data around those ends can look like. And we also, we got some positive feedback from board members that were there for the leadership retreat, but also from the principals and other members of the leadership team. And so we're working on developing that November, I think it's November 17th is the board development session, and bringing the leadership team together with the board actually to come back around issues like this, and also those ends and what monitoring to those could look like for us. So I think the timing was good for this type of conversation.
Was the intent in 2022 that these would be 5-year goals, or are we just looking at it now because we're looking at it now?
I don't think there was any timeline that John was thinking about. Again, these really came out of kind of multiple sources. A lot of was from obviously policies, things that we're seeing or that the group is seeing prior to me coming on board, needs, and a huge kind of community survey that went out in the spring of 2021 is where John came up with these initial ones. But to your point, I don't think he had like an end date in mind. But to Kevin's point, I think we're at the point where we can revisit this.
I think there was a piece about the board wanting to see a 3 to 5 year priority ongoing, right? It wasn't necessarily that you did it, throw a party, and then you move to sort of say, okay, we don't worry about priorities, but it was to have that sort of ongoing big picture. Yeah, perspective.
Feels like a good time to segue into continuous improvement plans. So this folder is linked on the agenda, and so you see there's a little bit of context actually that's probably important for this. We, as a state, for a long time, it predates my time here, individual schools had to develop continuous improvement plans. And then at some point, maybe 2018 or 2017, does that sound right, Andrew? That requirement was dropped for individual schools, and districts took over the writing of continuous improvement plans. They covered the entire district and all of the schools. You may remember last year, the Agency of Education was in a few different conflicts with the Federal Department of Education about their interpretation of some of the rules around the conditions attached to certain federal funds. And this is actually one of them. And so the state has had to go back to the previous model of school-based continuous improvement plans. And this is actually the first iteration of that new process that the state has outlined. As with all firsts, there are many issues with the process, and some of them are more acutely felt by us actually than by other districts. So the state has acknowledged that there are several boards that utilize a policy governance structure, such as us. And the way they structured this process actually doesn't really work for policy governance boards, because these are primarily operational plans that the schools are using on an annual basis, and it doesn't really align with the process that we might use as a policy governance board. The other thing that is problematic is that the process is we develop these plans in our schools in the spring and early summer. We submit them to the state. AOE will review them, give us feedback, they get adjusted, and then the Agency of Education approves them and expects us to implement them, and then we bring them to the board for a vote. So the process is a little clunky, and we fully expect it to change for next year, but at least for this year, it feels weird to say, but we have a folder full of continuous improvement plans that are already in place and are approved by the state, but still require a vote by the board to be approved. So I just wanted to own that kind of clunkiness up front. Andrew and I we've been kind of chuckling about this for a few weeks now. That said, these are hugely important documents, and I think it's worth spending some time to talk about them. For me, I think from the board level, it's really, we could go into any one of them and go down rabbit holes, but I think it's really good to talk about some of the themes that we see across all of these. And there are a couple of really strong themes that emerge across the district. The first one is that literacy is a huge focus for all the elementary schools. They all have great data in there that is driving the work they've identified. They all have ambitious goals that they've set related to that, and they all have plans that are unique to their individual circumstances, which is exactly the intent behind the process that the state set out for us.
Why are 3 of them at 80% and 2 are 85% for getting the students there with literacy?
Yes, so that's a great question, and you get a check plus for having done all your homework.
I told you I was going to do a job. I told you this on Thursday.
So there are
This is my softball.
There are some nuances to the plans, and each of the buildings is coming from different places in terms of where they currently are with their literacy data, and so the push from the state is to adopt a growth mindset and focus on metrics or goals that are growth based. And they actually discourage in the trainings that we've done. I'm sure Andrew sat through more than his fair share of those last year, as I know I did. They specifically discourage making schools set the same target within the same district, because we're all coming from different places. So for example, and I'm making it up because I'm totally going to confuse the data if I try to cite actual data here, but if Underhill, say, had 70% of students on grade level in 3rd grade, and Jericho had 58, right? We wouldn't want them to have the same exact goal. We want them to actually be exploring what their individual circumstances in those grade levels are. And the same thing actually goes within the same school, right? Jericho might have a lower performing grade level and several higher performing grade levels, and those all invite question and inquiry.
Yeah, just to build off of that, one of the first tasks of principals and their kind of school teams is to create what's called a data inventory. This is also a required component from the state. We submit that when we submit the consolidated federal grant. And so what the data inventory is they basically go through and look at, DT-CAP data, STAR data, or social emotional learning, survey data, whatever it might be, to really determine what are our needs? Should we really focus on math? Should we focus on literacy? Within the realm of social emotional learning, what is that we're going to do? And if you don't mind, just to keep building off of what John was saying, if you look at those, most if not all the schools focus on belonging. because that's a metric that we've been focused on for the last couple of years, and it's been recognized as kind of a foundational piece as within the realm of social emotional learning. So pretty much all the schools have continued with that and kind of continued building off of their work the last couple of years, and then tying it back to connections to policies. For the K4 schools, all of theirs are focused on literacy. That's a requirement of Act 139. At a minimum, you have to have one goal that's connected with literacy as per Act 139. So there are a lot of commonalities, but to John's point, the data differs from school to school, and so they will have slightly different metrics and goals.
So that's why the middle schools are able to focus on that.
So middle schools are focused on math.
Okay. Even though.
That's not to say that literacy isn't a need, but according to their data, they felt that math was the area that they need to focus on.
Well, but even in, it's like the same goal structure where it's like increasing reading proficiency, but so both focus on that.
Here's a question. Yeah, there's pretty, and I'll just say a few more things if you don't mind. One of my tasks this past spring was stewarding our principals through this process. So, because it was new for them. It was not new for me because I've been kind of the lead person for our district level one the last 4 years or last 3 years. This was new for most of our principals. And, it's not a hugely daunting task, but there's a lot to it, and you have to meet all the stringent requirements of the AOE to make sure that, when these are submitted, that you don't have certain pieces in there, they get kicked back, and it just creates this really long, drawn-out process that we don't want to do. So I spent a lot of time working with principals and their teams to kind of get all these things put together in the way that the state requires them to be. As John said, they hasn't been any issues. They've been improving them, so we've been good on that front. But it was a multi-month effort from around, I think it's January, February to all the way up to June to get these things tidied up, squared away, and aligned. Even though they're different from school to school, is also having some commonalities. We did do these together, so if you look at the K4 ones, there's probably going to be a lot of similarities because they created them together. I mean, there might be some slight differences with the actual numbers. They also wanted to have things similar so that they could collaborate on it throughout the year.
Yeah, I move to approve the continuous improvement plans as proposed.
Discussion. I have a question regarding, because like they all seem like, decreased by 25%, students that, aren't meeting the standard, or, increase up to 97% of ninth graders meeting or exceeding the rate proficiencies. Are we going to then track to see if they actually meet these goals? Or
Great point. So yes, so that's part of my work this year.
yeah, okay.
Is so we have our pre-K-12 admin meetings. That's when all the administrators get together. And one of the kind of ongoing things that we'll do during that meeting is to be me supporting principals with making sure that they're tracking progress. One of the requirements, if you go on the last page of all those CIPs, there's the progress monitoring piece of things. They have to track and progress 3 times per year. So this does fit neatly with how we do STAR and how we do the belonging survey. So it really, connects with that. So there'll be one in, the fall, probably October sometime, where they'll collect some data. One in the winter, January, and then one in the spring, April and May. And then we'll do kind of a full review at the end of the year. So progress monitoring, incorporating that data is a built-in component from the state. But again, it connects with kind of the general work you're doing of centering data and just really making sure, when we say that, something's working well, where's the data to back it up?
Also part of the PQS statements to report out on the results of our.
Heather, that was some of the questions too, because do we have data from your report to compare it to, or is this like setting the baseline?
Well, this is because the data before was district data, so it was all amalgamated together. It's not super helpful for this. Hopefully we stick with the school-based one for a couple of years so we can do that. We just go to the, do what the state tells us to do. So I hope that we stick with that so that we can then compare it over years.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Right, motion carries. Do we need rubber stamp?
Thank you, individual schools of our district.
Mascots were a nice touch.
Yeah.
That was me.
You're gonna live
Smile.
Let me tell you, the formatting was a bear.
Yeah.
It took a long time.
Smiley's mascot is a bear.
Yes.
Now people. Format here. So next up is to approve our minutes from the August 25th meeting. Can I get a motion? Or move?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, meeting's approved. Meeting minutes are approved.
So we're going with that.
Do you? I'm gonna really draw this out right now, Ethan.
Yeah.
Other business. So a quick VSBA update last week, the weekly email that came out from the VSBA was the webinar on resolutions is gonna be this Thursday. Because those resolutions is what the VSBA votes on in their business meeting at the end of October. So everybody should have had the opportunity to sign up for the regional meeting, which is at the end of this month, the 30th. And then the business meeting is the 23rd. I hope everyone saw Nora's email from today about signing up for the conference, which is the 29th and 30th of October. Nora's looking for people to write back to her by the end of this week so she can register whomever that is able to go.
You may have also noticed in that email the invitation to participate in the online course. So on policy governance. So I'm taking the course and I'll be in all the sessions. I know everyone has done some form of policy governance training, but if you want a refresher or it's been a while, just shoot Nora and me an email. We'll get you added to the registration list.
Helen, if you want to dive right in.
Absolutely.
Ethan, did you bring out for anything about
I
policy?
just,
She's got it all.
Okay, perfect.
and I've looked around the VSBA website. I don't have a school board email yet, so I did not get Nora's note, but I'll follow up with her and see where I can go from there.
You got an engraved sign?
Yeah, she's grateful.
Not so much for the IT team. That's right.
Well, they said
Sounds like
they
you've
do
been
power
busy.
school.
Yeah.
Only about a couple hundred emails that they had to create for students to.
This time of the year with all these crazy parents who are like, I can't get into power school. What's going
Yeah.
on? I need to update this piece of my data. And so on.
Probably why she didn't do it. I think it's just email or something.
Just, I don't know if you remember, we, at the, Mike Weston's little speech, don't look at Power School every day. And look at it with your student.
Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't make it.
Those excellent words of advice from Mr. Weston.
It was recorded. One of the students that recorded it and pass it on.
No, they didn't have cell phones.
Before the students recorded mess.
Kevin, are you on the regional advisory board?
Yeah, but I haven't heard of anything happening.
Nothing. Okay, great. Future subcommittee meetings, the HR committee is meeting on the 15th at 8 a.m. Lisa, do you have anything scheduled for finance yet?
Not yet, I need to get together with you.
And I know Allison's not here. Does anyone know about community engagement?
Didn't have a meeting today, so let's see what happens.
And then just FYI, you and I are also on HR committee, and so it'd be in conflict with that. We decide if there's a quorum, and we can split up.
Can I just ask, am I gonna follow Gail's assignment to the community engagement?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, we love you, exactly.
So then future board meeting is September 29th at Browns River Middle School. Great, it's an off week for us because Rosh Hashanah starts when we would have regularly been scheduled. Any other business?
I think I remember, do we need to officially accept Helen's appointment?
So I was wondering.
That's what I was trying to
We
find
might-
from my prior minutes how
It's
that
gotta be in the
happened.
policy somewhere.
I feel like that's
We
a
just,
step we missed, or
Yeah, because I
did
know
I not make
she's-
that meeting?
So I am having trouble recalling because I wasn't included in the process along the way. And
So what we can do maybe, since it's not on the agenda and the meeting is wrapping up, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself during our business here, and then at our next meeting, we could make the formal appointment.
I didn't vote on anything, so if that's helpful. I'm not shocked, because I heard that might be a problem.
Right, but Ethan, you confirmed that the select board does not have to.
right, that was what from Edie was the select board, and we're just notifying them that we make the decision. I think it would be as simple as making a motion to accept Helen Stoddard as the replacement for Dr. Gail Connolly as the second rep.
But I would just say, since it's
Oh,
not.
no.
Yeah,
So
so.
I mean,
it's not-
that motion.
You said the
I think
word.
it really should be warned for.
Yeah, so I think Kevin's right, the issue is it's not on the agenda, so I think I think your suggestion, Kevin, is a good one. If Helen, you just want to introduce yourself briefly to the board, and then we can warn it as an agenda item for the 29th, if that's okay.
That's fair. I appreciate that.
If we need to, I'm not sure that we need to.
Yeah, and I can't remember.
Somebody needs to.
I'd rather be overly.
Yes, get the town office now. Okay.
Well, I'm Helen Stoddard. I am from Massachusetts. My husband grew up in Huntington and went through Brewster Pierce all the way up through MMU. We hadn't planned on moving back to Huntington when we started looking up here in Vermont, but I fell in love with an old fixer-upper farmhouse and convinced him that it was a good idea. I still think I'm right. I was a special ed teacher in Massachusetts before having our kids, and I've been active in the community here since we moved up. Will and I are running the Huntington Youth Soccer Program. I'm co-chairing our high, and like to stay involved and volunteer for a number of different things. And I've been interested in joining the school board at some point when the time was right, and pulled Ethan aside last year just to pick his brain and ask a bunch of questions. It's like, wow, you seem like you're interested in this. So when this opportunity jumped up, I jumped on it. So happy to be here. I'm excited to learn. I think my goals are to create more of a dialogue and more community involvement from Huntington. I think we're kind of our little town off to the side, and pulling in more voices is on my list of things I'd like to accomplish.
Mentioned you were co-chair of PI.
Co-chairing.
Wheaton grad.
Wheaton grad. Wheaton is very well represented here.
Just crazy.
Isn't it? School with 1,600 kids. We end up with 3 Wheaton grads around.
Ethan, do you think you could also share maybe just some of the process, because I know you posted
yeah.
it. and-
So we did a front porch forum post, just asking for interest. A few folks, including Helen, submitted their letter of interest. Katie and I met with the candidates, asked a couple of very targeting questions. And it was great. I mean, I just want to say we are very lucky that Helen agreed to this. We had some excellent candidates throughout the process. I think I just also mentioned you were on the interview committee for the BPMS principal. And that was, I think, when we were like, oh, this board stuff seems interesting, and we've already shown a lot of commitment and engagement with the school. And so this opportunity, I think, to sort of see a bigger picture was also something we talked a little bit about.
That's how this district gets you. It's this principal. That was great.
And so the way it will work too is just Ellen will fill the seat till March. There will be 2 board openings in March. It will be my 3-year term, or the 3-year term that I'm currently occupying. And then there'll be the 1 year remaining on Dr. Khan. So we'll have a little bit of communication to the town of Huntington, just to say, like, we don't normally vote for 2 reps at the same time, or staggered, but this year we'll just be sending. Make a motion to.
Any other business? Down there, some drugs out.
Under other business?
And then. Okay, motion to adjourn.
I'm supposed to do there.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, everybody, for indulging me this evening.
Great job.